part. In any event, it's an honor to rise to speak on Bill S-206 at third reading stage, an act to amend the criminal code relating to Section 649, otherwise known as the jury secrecy rule. This bill, which I'm proud to be the House of Commons sponsor of, is a straightforward piece of legislation that carves out a narrow exception to the jury secrecy rule. As it currently stands, former jurors are unable to disclose any aspect of their jury service with anyone for life, even a medical professional bound by confidentiality. This bill addresses that by carving out an exception whereby former jurors who are suffering from mental health issues arising from their jury service can disclose all aspects of that service with a medical professional bound by confidentiality. This bill is a needed piece of legislation that will go a long way to supporting juror mental health, and I will get into the substance of that momentarily. But, Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased that this bill has been reported back to the House from Justice Committee unamended with unanimous support. This bill has already passed this House unanimously at second reading stage. A bill that I introduced in the 42nd Parliament, Bill C-417, a bill that is substantively the same as this bill, passed this House at all legislative stages but did not progress due to the call of the 2019 election. And this bill, thanks to the leadership of Senator Pierre Boisvenu, who introduced this bill in the Senate, and Senator Lucy Monsian, herself a former juror who suffered from mental health issues arising from her jury service, have seen this bill clear the other place again with unanimous support. I speak to the unanimity around this bill because it really does underscore that this is a common sense fix. It is not often that you can find unanimous support across the board from all parliamentarians, from all stakeholders involved, from jurors, former jurors, mental health professionals, lawyers, among others. Mr. Speaker, this bill is a product of the study that the Justice Committee undertook around juror supports, the first parliamentary study of its kind that was initiated by the member for Cowichan-Malahat, Langford. I had the privilege of serving on the committee during the study, as I continue to serve on the Justice Committee, and I can tell you that while there are many people that I can thank in terms of leading the bill to where it is at today, in terms of being on the cusp of being passed into law, this bill would not have happened but for the jurors who came before the Justice Committee. These former jurors came to our committee and they talked about the impact that jury service had on them. Jury service is something that I think sometimes we don't know enough about unless you're summoned to serve on a jury or know someone who has. But jury service can be stressful. Jurors can be exposed to horrific evidence, and it can have an impact on one's mental health. To provide just a little bit of context in terms of the experiences of former jurors who conveyed their stories before the Justice Committee, I want to take a moment to read into the record some of the testimony that we heard 4.5 years ago. Mark Ferrand, a jury foreman in a gruesome murder trial, said this, quote, "In court, as a juror, I took all the evidence in silently, as was my role. As jurors, we ingest the evidence and the facts. We do not interact with it. We are not afforded an opportunity to look away or raise our hands and say to the courtroom, 'Turn that off. I've had enough,'" end of quote. Tina Dancer, who served as juror number 1 in the gruesome Paul Bernardo trial, said, quote, "Imagine watching young girls being raped and tortured over and over again. You couldn't close your eyes and you couldn't look away because your duty was to watch the evidence," end of quote. Patrick Fleming, who served on a jury involving a 10-month gruesome murder trial, spoke about jury service and the impact it had upon his life. And he said, quote, "When my civic duty was done, I was able to go home to my family and return to my normal life. I pulled into my driveway and expected feelings of relief to wash over me, but something was different. I did not feel at my place of peace. Something was not right," end of quote. He went on to say, quote, "We need assistance getting back to our normal life. We are civilians who did not choose this path for ourselves, nor are we trained to deal with this type of situation. Being a juror is a monumental job that has had a major impact on my life," end of quote. Mr. Speaker, in the course of our study, we heard about the jury secrecy rule and the degree to which it can impede jurors getting the full mental health supports that they need. And in that regard, there are at least 2 impediments. First, the deliberation process is often the most stressful aspect of jury service. And so to not be able to talk about what is often the most stressful aspect of jury service is clearly an impediment to getting the help that a juror suffering from mental health issues requires. A second issue that is more general in nature is that it can impact the ability of former jurors to have full and frank discussions with mental health and other medical professionals because there is a lack of understanding about what the boundaries are, about what can be talked about in light of the jury secrecy rule. We even heard that some medical professionals are reluctant to take on former jurors as clients as a result. Mr. Speaker, that's where this bill comes in. It provides clarity in the law and ensures that former jurors can have those full and frank discussions in a strictly confidential context, full and frank discussions that are often so vital to getting better in the face of mental health issues. This legislation is not novel. It would be new to Canada, but it has been successfully implemented in the Australian state of Victoria, where it has worked very well. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that this issue and the way that this bill has moved forward speaks to Parliament working at its best. We had a groundbreaking study on juror supports in which an issue was identified around jurors getting mental health supports, and a solution was identified. And rather letting the unanimous reports sit on the shelf and collect dust, I did take it upon myself to introduce a bill, Bill C-417, a few months after the release of that report. But I had, at all stages up until today, received full support and collaboration from all members on all different sides, including the member for Mount Royal, who was the chair of the Justice Committee during the study, the member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford, the former member for Victoria, who's the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs today in the Government of British Columbia, among many others, all of whom recognized that this was an issue and that we needed to work together to implement a common-sense key recommendation that is small but will have a meaningful impact. Now, Mr. Speaker, while this bill is very close to crossing the finish line, and I hope it will cross the finish line today so that we can send this to the Governor-General, it is a step forward, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done around juror mental health. When you think about it, in a criminal trial, the lawyers, the Crown, the defense, the presiding judge, court workers, they all have access to various mental health programs and supports. But guess who doesn't so often? It is the men and women who don't have a choice to be there. They're there because they have been summoned. They are performing their civic duty, and often they have nothing in the way of mental health support programs. And fortunately, there has been some movement. 4 provinces now have juror support programs, but they aren't robust enough. In short, jurors in those 4 provinces have access to up to 4 counseling sessions free of charge, and then after that often is about it. And those measures were only implemented in the last number of years, and I recognize the member for Ottawa Centre, because when he was the Minister of Justice, he heard Mark Farrand and took it upon himself to see that the province of Ontario developed a juror support program. But there is more work to do, because in 6 provinces there are essentially no supports, and we need to do better. And so what I hope is that after we pass this bill, that the government will take seriously the implementation of another key recommendation of that report on juror supports, and that is to work with the provinces to address the patchwork in the lack of supports, the inadequacy of supports, and provide, among other things, one-time funding so that we can have the supports that are there that jurors deserve. Mr. Speaker, jurors play an integral role in the administration of justice. We owe it to them to see that they should not have to suffer from mental health issues, unable to get help. This bill is a step in the direction of helping former jurors. I say very simply, this is a bill that has been studied, it has been debated, it's been done exhaustively. We all know the issue, we know what needs to be done. Let's get this bill passed and sent to the Governor-General to be brought into law today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So we have 5 minutes, questions and comments. Question commentaire. The Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member from St. Albert, Edmonton, for his remarks, and perhaps ask him, given that he was involved in the initial study that was done by the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights, if he could also outline some of the other recommendations that were part of that report in relation to jury support.
Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And one of the key recommendations was to see that former jurors who are suffering from mental health issues can access as many counseling sessions as required. Another important component was to see that former jurors have information packages so they have a better idea of what jury service entails, because a big stressor is that of the unknown. Many jurors, up until they are summoned, have very little experience in terms of the criminal justice system and what a trial looks like and what impacts a trial can have. So that is a very straightforward recommendation that all provinces can work towards offering in the way of information. And another recommendation that I think is key is seeing that there is training, not of jurors, but of judges and other actors in the justice system to recognize and better understand some of the stressors that jurors face and to work to help alleviate those in the course of a trial as a result of that greater awareness.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for North Island, Powell River.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank this member for his very impassioned speech and his advocacy on this issue continuously through many parliaments. I couldn't agree more. We need to get this out the door for sure so that we can see jurors across this country really supported in a meaningful way. But one of the things that he touched on, I just wondered if he could expand on, is this is a civic duty. That is what jurors are doing, and yet we're leaving them in this country at this point with a great amount of suffering. And it's like being wounded while you're serving your country. So I'm just wondering if he could talk about how important it is to recognize that and make sure that that isn't the legacy we leave. Thank you.
The Honourable Member, St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for North Island, Powell River. And she is absolutely right. Jury service is a mandatory form of civic duty. As Mark Farrand often notes, it is the last mandatory form of civic duty since the abolition of conscription. And the former jurors that we heard from, and I think they reflect most former jurors across Canada, are proud of their jury service. But they also believe that they shouldn't suffer from mental health issues, unable to get help because they performed their civic duty. Jurors undertake work integral to the administration of justice in Canada at a considerable personal cost. We have to recognize it, and we've got to do more to support them as a result.
Questions and comments? The
Honourable Member for Shefford, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for his intervention. And he just talked about it. People are compelled to take part in jury duty. He also mentioned that people aren't always ready to hear all the horrors that one can hear during a court case. Perhaps former jurors could retroactively be helped to recognize the great work that they have done and what they have been subject to. So perhaps this could create PTSD in long term. So this bill is very important. Should it be retroactive to those who have already gone through the process?
Edmonton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would be retroactive in the sense that former jurors would be able to disclose all aspects of their jury service with a medical professional, even if that trial concluded years ago. One thing I do want to add is that some of the former jurors who did appear before our committee, Mark Farrand and Tina Dancer, who are here in Ottawa, have done incredible work to support jurors through the Canadian Juries Commission. And so they've taken what was an incredible amount of suffering and difficulty and have worked to bring greater awareness around some of the issues facing jurors, and they're to be commended for their leadership.
Continuing